So I listened to the Today programme this morning with John Humphreys, where he invited Boris Johnson, because apparently Boris Johnson has called the leader of the opposition muff-headed mugwump. So that gets him an interview, that brings him back onto the platform after we haven't heard very much from him at all. I would imagine the party shut him up. So, on Brexit, as John Humphrey says, Brexit is the reason for this snap election. Then Johnson refers to Corbyn's chaotic EU negotiations. Corbyn hasn't done EU negotiations, and what he's proposed is actually quite sensible. Provides no evidence for this, actually no evidence for any of the sound bites that he's given. So John Humphreys then asks him whether he could be trusted as the Foreign Secretary, given all the controversial facts that he proponed during the EU campaign. And then, of course, Johnson goes on to say, Corbyn is so chaotic, so that's his answer. He gets probed again. Again, Johnson says, Corbyn is so chaotic and it's dangerous if we have Corbyn as the leader. So, no answer. Then John Humphreys goes on to mention the 350 million lie. And then there's a kind of answer, and he says, half of it is completely gone, and the other half that comes back, we have no control over. So, the no control over then made me think, why do we have MEPs? We have 73 MEPs. There's only 751 MEPs in the whole of the EU Parliament, and so that means we have 10%. So that's not a say. We don't have a say. We have 10%. 1 in 10 MEPs are English, are British, and quite a few of them are UKIP ones. And then Johnson gave some bollocks about the country needs to unite. It needs to unite. Unite. Yes, of course, unite. You divided it. Yes. You divided it so badly as it hasn't been in decades, divided through your stupid referendum, completely forgetting that we have 73 MEPs. They don't have a say. No, they don't have a say. So then John Humphreys asks him about, the 50 to 60 billion bill that the EU wants to impose. And then Johnson just said, they're single mind. I can't see their single mindedness. What. And then again he says, Corbyn is weak. So then John Humphreys has to push him again. He says, what if the money isn't forthcoming before the negotiations? There won't be any negotiations. And then Johnson just says, that's not going to happen. What a childish guy. That's not going to happen. Who are you to say that's not going to happen? Because your strong recommendations, perhaps. So then he says the days where we dish out huge amounts of money to the EU will end, when we cut off the links to the EU. But on the other hand, you want to be in solidarity with them. Again, John Humphreys, which I have to say, by the way, has slightly gone up in my estimation, because at least he wasn't completely swamped over by Johnson, although Johnson did try. So he presses him again. If we don't pay the EU, there will not be any negotiations. And again, Johnson just says, let's see about that. And then, he sort of postures and says, we're a smug and we have a smug and successful economy. it doesn't extend, this successful economy doesn't extend and can't support the poor of this country, the millions of poor. That's how successful we are. So then John Humphreys moves on to the US decision to give preference to the priority to the EU trade deal compared to, in comparison to the UK economy. And again, his response is just pathetic. Yes, his response is really, really convincing. It says, well, the White House over the last few months, they've been telling us that they're extremely excited. Excited about what? and he says, there's all sorts of opportunities. And then bizarrely, he talks about all those lady listeners who aren't even aware of that there is an election. I have no idea what that is doing in his answer there. And then Johnson says, yes, but we had Paul Ryan, he's the Speaker of the House of the Senate in the US government, or Parliament rather, and actually, well, giving the impression that we are first in line for trade deals. He has actually no mandate to say anything like that. The Speaker of the House of the Senate, I have checked that, fact-checked it, has more of a ceremonial role in most cases, especially if he's from the same party as the President. So the ceremonial person gives the impression that we are first in line, gives the impression. It's just bullshit. Then he comes back to these trade opportunities. So he mentions the beef ban that the US is in place, from us to the US. We can't export, and then the haggis, and he gives those as examples of opportunities for trade deal negotiations. And then in the same breath he says, well, but we can't give details after he's just given 2 details. But let's pencil it in. That's what he says. I mean, what a moron. So then John Humphrey asks him about immigration. And there's some reasonable answers, I have to admit. But then he goes to ask about excluding foreign students. And then Johnson does something bizarre. He says how proud he is of the foreign student market, how profitable it is, and then he says 1 in 7 kings and queens and prime ministers around the world have been educated in England. 1 in 7. That's great, that's wonderful, but there's nothing of substance there. There's millions of others that you don't talk about. It's just anecdotal facts, really. It's got nothing to do with, running an immigration. So you've got to give preference to them, of course you would, wouldn't you? It's just total bollocks. And then about Syria, then of course he goes on as an expert, of course, an absolute the unquestionable attack with the sarin gas against innocent victims, by the Assad regime. He presents a suspicion as a fact, and you cannot do that. I mean, you cannot run a country on suspicion. See what happened with the Iraqi war. Because this obviously was in relation to if the US asked us to, in future, to help with attacks like that happened a month ago, based on suspicion that it was Assad. In fact, Assad, of course, categorically denies it, and most of the world also are suspicious that actually this is true. But let's leave it at that. So then John Humphreys presses him on would they consult the House of Commons? And then Johnson just says, well, if they ask us, it would be very hard to say no. It would be very hard to say no. And then he goes on and says, well, the Prime Minister will decide, if a Commons vote is necessary. Oh, that's very good. Thanks for the democracy. Um, and then he goes on to say, if the US is forced again to unleash attacks, forced again, he said, forced again by an attack, as we've seen, which is, yes, we don't know who made the attack. And then he says, with a weapon that was banned 100 years ago. So in 2013, we sold weaponized gas to a Middle East country. That's a fact. So, what the hell? We sell it to them, they use it, and then we say, well, that was banned 100 years ago. What on earth? So basically, he's fishing for favours. He wants to go into bed with the States again. Just like in the Iraqi war, and he's hoping that this favour then will somehow give us good trade, conditions, deals. Ridiculous. A foreign policy based on that interview is childish, unprofessional, unrealistic. And then he goes on, again he brings Corbyn into it by linking him somehow with Kim Jong-un of North Korea, that they're on the verge of these very dangerous nuclear weapons. We have them. The only country that's ever used them is the United States. As you may remember, no other country has ever used them in an aggressive act. So again, he says, Corbyn is against these dangerous weapons. Yes, of course, everybody in the world should be against these dangerous weapons. And Corbyn is the only person, apart from the Green Party, who has got, some strategy of how to create a world free of weapons, whereas all you want to do is you want to use them, you don't want to get rid of them. And then again, he undermines Corbyn by saying that he wouldn't have a shoot-to-kill policy in the event of an Islamic attack. It's ridiculous. It is scaremongering bollocks, it is. Because, of course, he would have it. But what he would have, as well as the Green Party, we would have a strategy to make sure that political solutions are found, diplomatic solutions, because bombs create terrorists, don't they? I mean, more and more people are believing this. Bombs create more and more terrorists. More bombs, more terrorists. It's as easy as 1 and 1 is 2. And last but not least, let's get back to the muff-headed mugwump. I sat on the toilet a little while ago, and I thought, well, that's quite creative, isn't he? So let's see whether I can, sitting on the toilet having a wee, find... so I spent 5 minutes just... So I came up with this: Trumpy head, twatty-eyed yo-yo go. So that's one. The other one is childish pillocky Etonian wallop. The third one, here I am-ish attention seeker boy. There you go. And then the last one, I mean, they're not funny, but there you go. That's what 5 minutes of sitting on a toilet can do. Dumpy Numpty fell off his horse, and I really hope that he is going to fall off his horse big time. I hope he's not going to be elected. I hope something happens that he will not be elected, and that the Tories are not there elected.